Once again, my name's Kristen Fletcher. Thank you for joining me tonight for a presentation by popular Boise-based guidebook author and outdoor photographer Scott Marchant. He wrote The Hiker's Guide to Sun Valley and Ketchum. Scott was born and raised in Orlando, Florida, and there he fell in love with the wilds of nature in one of the flattest states in the Union, one whose highest elevation is a mere 345 feet above sea level. Then, when he went to college in Nevada, journeyed west, he discovered the Sierra Nevadas, real mountains. And then on a vacation to Idaho, he fell in love with our endless wilderness and rugged mountains. He's lived in Boise since 2003, except for a short, cold stint in Stanley, Idaho, in 2008 and 2009, when he decided to write his first guidebook for the Sawtooth Mountain Range. Other guidebooks in his popular Hiker's Guide series include Idaho's Sawtooth Country, Exploring Greater Boise, and Mccall and Cascade. So please join me in welcoming Scott Marchant.
Thanks, Kristen. I was going to give you all that information. Now I don't have to talk about that. That's great. I want to thank Kristen and the Haley Library for having me, and also for Sarah for my kind of class for help sponsor this event. So, and I want to thank you all for coming. I did this, the book just came out last Wednesday in Boise, and I only got 90 printed, and the printer, the machine broke or something. They have to send it, nobody can print books in Boise, so they have to send it for bindery to Salt Lake. And apparently the bindery equipment broke. It was all printed, but they did get 90 books finished. So I was able to at least have enough for the presentation tonight and a couple events that I had in Boise. In fact, I did this last week and we had one person show up. So it's nice to see a few more people than that. But the gal that owns this little store admitted she didn't do a very good job advertising it. So anyway, so a couple things. I'm going to start out with, I lived in Stanley for 2 years. I made it through a second winter about halfway and then moved back to Boise because if you've been up there in the winter, it's extremely cold. And I wrote a guidebook kind of for fun, for something to do. I was married and my ex-wife was kind of the income maker, and we ended up getting a divorce, and I thought, ooh, I either got to go back and get a real job or I got to figure out a way to make a living doing this. And it was during the Great Recession, so I thought, I better see if I can make a living doing this. So I'm glad I took that route because I wouldn't be doing it today, and that's how I got involved in doing these guidebooks. But I do a calendar, cards. My cards are sold at Atkinson's and Chateau Drug up in Ketchum.
I have them too.
Excuse me? Oh, and you have some of the cards, that's true. I kind of class. And my puzzles, right. You have most of my stuff. So what I wanted to do was go through the books just real quick. I have two Boise books, and this one is a Best Easy Hikes book. Everything in here is 5 miles or less than 1,000 feet of gain. So it's kind of medium to easy. I'm at the Saturday market in downtown Boise every Saturday, and I had so many people come up to me and just say, I want an easy hike. I want an easy hike. I don't want, all the books have some easy hikes. And I thought, well, why don't I just write a book that's easy hikes? So this came out in 18, and it's current. The biggest thing that makes a guidebook go out of date is a forest fire. Fortunately, there hasn't been a big forest fire since 18 in the Boise National Forest. It's a 2-hour radius around Boise. So this goes Idaho City, Loman, Sachem Reservoir, Garden Valley, down to Leslie Gulch, Snake River, over to Mountain Home, and then the Boise foothills. So it's a pretty big geographic area. This book came out last year. Came out during COVID. And what I did is this is kind of geared 6 to 9 miles. There are hikes longer than 9 miles, but it's Boise National Forest, but it also incorporates Pine, Featherville, and Anderson Ranch Reservoir and the South Fork of the Boise River. So if you go down Warm Springs Road, go over the pass, you're over where many of these hikes are over in Featherville. And there's some pretty hiking there, especially in May and June when you, hopefully here we have a lot of snow still. So, and this book just came out last year. Then there's a Mccall Cascade book. This starts at Sachem Reservoir, which is in the Boise book. So just north of Sachem Reservoir, that's off Highway 55, you come into Cascade, and this book goes all the way to Riggins. So it's mainly the Salmon River Mountains and the West Mountains, which is where Tamarack is. So it's pretty much every single track trail that's a really nice hiking trail in that it's a pretty big, large geographic area. And then I have the Sawtooth Guidebook. What's interesting is this book, when I first wrote my first book, I called it The Day Hiker's Guide to Stanley. And I really didn't know what I was doing yet. And I published the book, self-published it, and then I wouldn't get any sales other than people in Boise. People didn't know where Stanley was outside of Idaho. Now, you got to go back. This is 2008, 2009. So I called it the Sawtooth Country when I reprinted it and updated the book in 2015. What's interesting about this book, I wanted to call it The Hiker's Guide to the Smoky Boulder and Pioneer Mountains. Problem is, nobody knows where those mountains are except for people in Wood River Valley. In fact, I mentioned the Smoky Mountains and people go, isn't that in Tennessee? I'm like, no, there's Smoky Mountains here. But if you mention Sun Valley and Ketchum, you know, especially outside the state, most people know where that is. So when this book came out in 10, it was my second book that I wrote. I was still get a little green, and I didn't want to talk about where you could camp. My first two books, I didn't mention anything about backpacking. The third book, which was the Mccall book, I did a presentation at REI, and somebody said, you're at all these places, why don't you talk about where you can camp? And I said, well, that's more work, but I'll do it. So every book since then, if I'm on a trail, I'm looking for camp spots that are already used. I don't just see a meadow and go, hey, I want you to go over and camp in the middle of that meadow, but try and keep people going to the same spots where maybe a fire ring is. And you'll find this in the new book, which was not in the old book. So the new book, where'd it go? There it is. This has backpacking in it too. So not every single trail, but most of the trails when you're in the backcountry, like over in Copper Basin or in the backside of the Pioneers. I'm a little nervous. I haven't presented, except for that one person, pre-COVID for 2 years. I used to do these all the time. So a couple other things that I did with the book that's different from the old book. There was no color. The new book has 24 pages of color photography, so you can look at the different destinations. The maps were not very good. If you look at the maps in the new book, I've had the same editor and book designer for the last 6 years, and they're very, very good. And every book we get a little bit better at designing and making the books. And so if you look at the maps in here, they're very good. We actually take the 7.5 quad, which is the most detailed map. I give her exactly the section, we cut it down and put it in the book. And I give her little dialogue boxes to put in here so that you can see where maybe an unbridged creek ford is, so you would know exactly where you are on the trail. If there's an off-trail viewpoint or something, I'll point it out on the map. So you get more information than you're going to get if you went and bought the 7.5 quad map, which is hard to find anyway. They don't really make them much anymore. People don't buy them and use them. So that's kind of the big revisions to the book. There is a top 10 list, top 10 backpacks, top 10 wildflower hikes. I'm really into wildflowers, so I pay a lot of attention to wildflowers. I've kind of self-taught myself a lot of the flowers, so I try and mention what you're going to see. And this book is considerably larger, 65 hikes. The other thing I did in 2010 is I sat down with Renee Catherine. Does anybody know her? No. She maintained all the trails for the Ketchum Ranger District. And we sat down and I got this big map out and we just went over every single trail. And she goes, nope, don't do that one. It saved me a lot of time. I said, what about this one, Rooks Creek? She goes, oh, that's a great hike if you go when the wildflowers are out. So she made it very efficient for me. Last summer in 2010, took me 2 years to research all the trails. And she has since retired, but she really was very instrumental in making it efficient to research all the hikes. So I'm going to go through 10 hikes. Here's the new book. See how good you guys are. Do you know where that's the cover. Does anybody know where that is? Nope. It's actually the first hike I'm going to talk about. Yes. It's going up to Hyman Basin. And right before you get into the basin, there's this beautiful waterfall. And I went down into the thing to take the picture. But, excuse me?
That's not the view. You see it up from the trail.
Right. You see it up high. I scurried down to the bottom to take the photo. So here's the locator map for all the trails. This area, I didn't cover Copper Basin in the first book. I did 4 different trails here in Copper Basin, and I'm going to talk about one of those. North Fork Lake wasn't. There's about 30 hikes that weren't in the first book. Considerable. And some of the hikes, I don't want to say I cheated to get 50, but I made up some routes and stuff. Well, I took all that, and I just rewrote this whole book. I didn't borrow anything from this book. It was to make a second edition. It was going to be more work. I thought, I'm just going to write just a whole new book. And all I used was to confirm my numbers, maybe total elevation gain and whatnot. So I'm going to present starting low. Here's Haley. And we're going to go up 75. And then we're going to go down Trail Creek and back over to Copper Basin. When I did this last week, it was the first time I presented, I was bouncing around all over the place, and people that didn't know this area, she was so confused by the time I got done. Because, you know, you can go to the Pioneers from here, you can go to the Pioneers on the backside from up here, the boulders you can approach from 75, you can also come back here up the Lost River. So there's a lot of different ways to get into these mountain ranges. So here we go. And if you have any questions, just, how many people have hiked Hinman? I'm sure, or the North Fork of Hinman. So this first hike is one of my favorites in this area. That's when you drive down East Fork Road, and then you take another forest road up about 5 miles to the very end. That's the trailhead. That goes to the Big Basin and to the Hinman Basin. A lot of people go to Hinman Basin to climb Hinman Peak. So that trail gets a lot of use. If you've not been to the Big Basin, the trail goes up 2 mile splits. The Big Basin's equally as pretty, but gets, you know, probably 10% of the amount of people in that, and it's equally as pretty, but the trail just feathers out up in the Big Basin. If you keep going past the trailhead about 1/10 of a mile, it dead ends. It's not signed. There's just a little sign there that says no motor vehicles, and that's the trailhead. And you can see right back here's that trailhead we went by. There's a pit latrine, but you can see I'm the only vehicle there. These pictures were taken in August. This is one of the top wildflower hikes in the book, although I'm in mid-August, so all of them are dead. I couldn't find my pictures from when I had done it one July. So you'll go up about half a mile or quarter mile. You'll be right on the North Fork of Hinman. Then you come into this meadow and cross Button Creek at 6/10 of a mile. And then it turns at about a mile, and the canyon narrows, and you're in forest pretty much for the next couple miles. And you parallel the North Fork of Hinman Creek, which is right down here. The hike is easy to right here. This is 2.2 miles. And I mentioned in the books, I have places where I try and say, hey, you can stop at this point if you're with kids or you're not wanting a hard hike, so that people can shorten the hikes. And that's where I suggest people stop if they don't want it, because after this, it starts going up 50 feet, down 50 feet, up 50 feet. So the elevation gain starts accumulating. You'll see the trail there on the left. You start getting some good view into the high peaks in the Pioneers. And see, this is all wildflowers. They're all dead here, but at 2.2 miles, the trail will kind of start switchbacking right here. There's a switchback that goes to the left. You'll see a foot trail that continues back, and there's an unnamed lake up here, and there's great places to camp. The Forest Service has put a big log right there to discourage people, but you can see the trail. You just step over the log, and it keeps going. But so I didn't put that in. I didn't want to put this type of data in the book because it will just increase the amount of people going up there. And then it'll, at about 3 miles, it'll switch back 7 times. And you can see by the skinniness of the trail how little use it gets. What's interesting, I was doing this particular hike, I ran into a guy who's about 22 right in this area, and he goes, I'm trying to climb Hinman Peak. Can I get here? I saw a cabin and I'm coming back down. I said, you're on the wrong trail. You need to be over on the Hinman Creek Trail. But anyway. Hyman. Is it Hinman or Hyman? Hyman. We were talking about that, and I was getting different input from people. At 4.1 miles, it'll plateau, and you'll be at the cabin. And there are 4 routes to the Pioneer Cabin Trail, the Johnstone Creek Trail, the Long Gulch Trail, and the North Fork. And to me, the North Fork's the prettiest. It's a little bit longer, about a quarter mile longer than going up Pioneer Cabin Trail, but I would say 90% of the people that go there use that trail, and it feels, if you go to the trailhead on a Saturday, there's 30 cars sitting there. So there's the cabin, if you've not been there before. Great views. The cabin's open to the public. It says the higher you get, the higher you get. Not sure what that means, but I have some ideas. So it's 2 rooms. It's open to the public. I've never seen a cabin anywhere that I've ever hiked where there's a cabin open to the public. And there's the room you would initially walk into, and then there's that little bedroom in the back. And there's a bunch of people have scrolled stuff on the sides of the walls in there. It's really interesting to read. It's like reading a philosophy book. It's inspiring. So this next hike is Rooks Creek. How many people have hiked Rooks Creek? I didn't think I'd see a hand. This trail, now we're going north, up 75. This is off Warm Springs Road. You go up to where Warm Springs cuts off of 75, right, north of downtown Ketchum, and it's 11.9 miles out Warm Springs Road. It's right past Frenchman's Hot Springs. You'll go about a mile past Frenchman's Hot Springs. There's 3 other trails that are in the book that were not in the original book. There's Red Mountain, or not Red Mountain, sorry, I gotta find my notes here. Red Warrior, Castle Creek Trail, and Warfield. All of those you have to cross Warm Springs Creek to get to the trailhead. I mean, literally the trailhead's like there, and here's the creek. And if you were to try and cross it right now, you'd probably drown. I mean, I haven't been up there to see it, but all the snow melt we're having, this particular trail, you do not have to cross Warm Springs Creek. So this is a great early season hike. It's one of the top wildflower hikes. Renee told me about this particular trail. There's the trailhead, and it's not signed other than that sign that's right off of it. You literally go up, you'll see Rooks Creek, and you go back about 50 yards, and there's the trailhead. I'm the only vehicle there. You're going to notice a lot of smoky pictures because I did a lot of these hikes last summer, and if you were around last summer, it was extremely smoky and very dry. So you'll cross Rooks Creek within 500 feet. There's a little bridge over here, or a little log bridge, if the water was high. Now these pictures are here in August. Again, I'm behind the flower. There were a few flowers. This was actually late July. So the next half mile, it's pretty level, and it just follows the creek, Rooks Creek. At 7/10 of a mile, you'll come to this bigger meadow that's about a quarter mile long, and then you'll enter Douglas Fir Forest again at a mile. And there's plenty of places to camp in here. You can see how skinny the trail is. Then you'll hit this huge meadow. It's about 6/10 of a mile. All of these are wildflowers. And I want to go back and hike this in July. I got to think that it's just absolutely gorgeous back here. And you will pass at about 1.5 miles in this big meadow. Boyle Mountain is right, you can't see it, but it's almost a 9,000 foot peak. There was a bunch of mining here that was done for over 50 years. And there's a bunch of relics still there. So there's that one, there's an old cabin. It's kind of falling apart. And then you'll go back through the meadow, it turns into sagebrush, and the canyon really narrows right here at 2 miles. You'll go back, you'll see the creeks right here. It's pretty small now at this point. And look how skinny it is. You can see it's not getting a lot of use. And part of these hikes was trying to come up with a destination. If you're going to a lake, it's real easy to say, here's the destination. If you're going to a mountaintop, it's real easy. These type of hikes, it's like, well, what's the destination? Where are you sending people to? So many times I'll hike. This is about 2.8 miles, and this is where I made the destination. I hiked up the trail another mile, but it's super burned from the Castle Rock fire in 13, and it's super steep, and it's rocky, and there's nowhere to there's not much shade, and I'm going to have people stop here. Now, I'm going to tell them if they keep going 1.9 miles, you will intersect with the Osberg Trail that comes out of Baker Lake and goes all the way down to Fox Peak. This trail will eventually intersect that. So from here, it's 1.9 miles to reach that Ridgeline Trail. But the creek's over here, you're in this beautiful Douglas Fir Forest, and that's a destination. And that's Rooks Creek. Hopefully some of you guys have hiked Taylor Canyon Loop. This is one of the best, to me, wildflower hikes if you do it, probably right now. I love doing this hike. This one, you go north of Ketchum about 3.5 miles. You'll turn on Lake Fork Road, go back about 2.5 miles, and there's a trailhead. It's a 4-mile loop with 1,000 feet of gain. So it's not that long of a hike. In fact, I get a lot of people that go, hey, we're just heading up there, and we just want to do an easy hike. We're going to have dinner and maybe do a little hike after dinner or before dinner. And this is a hike I recommend because it's so close to town, and it's so pretty, especially in the spring, or in the late spring.
Last week the tip was to do the reverse loop. It was really, really crowded going one way.
Really? On this trail?
Yeah, but to go the opposite direction.
So counterclockwise. Mm-hmm. Okay. I'm going to take you clockwise.
Yeah.
No, we're going to go counterclockwise. You're talking about going clockwise. So it starts this is Taylor Canyon, and it'll start up the canyon. It goes about 1 mile back. As you get deeper into the canyon, these pictures were taken late March. This is 2 years ago. And as you know, every year is a lot different. In fact, there was thunderstorms this day. Everything's super green. But back here, it starts to switch back up, and it gains about 500 feet in some Douglas Fir Forest. This is late March. or late May. Lots of arrowleaf balsam root. And then this is the canyon. The trail, you can't go up further up the canyon unless you were to go off trail. And these are all wildflowers. They were a little bit before, this is the end of May. And it will peak right here at about 1.5 miles. And now it's all about the views. The trail stays up on the ridge, and this is looking back up to the Boulder Mountains. And the nice thing about going now is all the peaks have a lot of snow on top, so it's really, really pretty. And then it will go about 1/4 mile, so there were some flocks, and then it goes south. So now it's paralleling Taylor Canyon high above. Here's Highway 75. Here's Griffin Butte, and there's Baldy. And again, this was the end of May last year, 2 years ago. At about mile 3, it will drop 500 feet. It kind of switchbacks down the side of the hill. You'll come to this unsigned junction. This goes to some of the neighborhoods around there. You'll take a left, and it drops down to the trailhead along the edge of Douglas Fir Forest. But I love doing that hike as a close hike. That one and Chocolate Gulch Loop. Those are probably my two favorite, if I'm going to do something in town. We're going to continue to go north. When I wrote the original book, there was no wilderness in 2010, so they made this wilderness. The Hemingway Boulders Wilderness in 2015. So all of this was not wilderness prior to me writing the book. There are 6 trails here. And so what happens when they make a wilderness? You can't take mountain bikes in there. So you used to take mountain bikes here. Now you can only hike or take a horse. That's the only way you can travel in this wilderness. And I'm glad they made it wilderness. This is Murdoch Creek. That's the first trail you'll come to. So this is up where the SNRA headquarters are. Take a right on that dirt road. And it goes back 4.5 miles and dead ends. And so all these trails are off that dirt road. And Murdoch Creek, the first mile is handicap accessible. And then after that, it starts side hilling, and you wouldn't want to be in a wheelchair on it. This is the East Fork. If you go to the very end, there's 4 trails you can go that I have 4 hikes described. This is the West Fork of the North Fork of the Big Wood River. This is the Amber Lakes. This is the North Fork of the Big Wood River and West Pass. So these are all labeled as separate hikes when you read the descriptions and everything about them. We're going to go do, which I think is about the prettiest one up here, which is this hike here. How many people have hiked the North Fork of the Big Wood River? Got a few. So this hike is 7.8 miles and 1,800 feet again. I'm sorry, it's 8.8 miles to go to the end. What's interesting about all of these trails in this area is they just peter out. There's no sign that says you're the end of the maintained trail. So you're hiking and all of a sudden it's disappearing, but you can still see a little bit of a path, and eventually it just fades away. So it's hard to, all these was like, this one's easy because you go to the pass. But, so I would just go to the point where really you couldn't see a trail anymore, come up with something that looks like a nice destination, an outcropping or something on the creek, and that's where we're gonna go on this trail here. But you can see it kind of dead ends right there. So that'd be, 4.4 miles from the trailhead. There's the trailhead. They move, once they make an area wilderness, they typically will back roads up to give it a little bit more of a buffer. So you used to could drive up about another 1/2 mile, and there was a big trailhead down here. Well, they've backed it up to right here and put this trail in. You can still walk the road, but they would, I think, like you to take the trail. Eventually, maybe that road will disappear, or they'll do something to close it down, I don't know. But you can't drive on it. There's a bunch of boulders that prevents you from going anywhere past the trailhead. You'll go up 1/4 mile, the trail will split, it's not signed. If you go to the left, this will take you to the Amber Lakes, which are beautiful. They're off trail, there's 2 of them. And the trail peters out at a little pond right before you get to the lakes, and you can do a 1/2 mile loop and see both lakes, but it's not a maintained trail. So, there'll be, everybody knows what cairns are, where rocks are stacked on top of each other. You kind of have to look for cairns. You'll see the lake, go over a little saddle, and drop down to the other lake. But they're pretty lakes. They're very small. But we're going to go to the right. You'll go up to a little saddle, and it drops down. This is about 1 mile into the hike, and you'll see the trail right here, and it parallels. This was last year. This area's been in a drought, probably more so than almost all of Idaho. And so a lot of these creeks, and in fact, I'll show you a picture here in a minute, the creek's completely dry. And people have put sticks in there, but you didn't need the sticks because there's no water. So anyway, it goes up here. There's some good camping here. You get to see these big 10,000-foot peaks, and there it is. So when I did this in the original book, I'd go, okay, you're going to need to ford this little creek. You might have to take your shoes off. Well, that was the last week of July. There's no water in it. And you can see where they put sticks here to cross if there was water. At 2.2 miles, you come to this beautiful little meadow, and you can go to the right to go to the West Pass Creek, or the West Pass, or you're going to go left to go up to the North Fork of the Big Wood River. That West Pass is one of the hardest trails in the book. You gain 2,900 feet in 2.6 miles, and there's hardly any trees. So you don't want to do it on a day when it's 90. It's beautiful, the views are incredible, but it's not a hike. You got to be in pretty good shape to do that hike. So we'll go left. And what you do is it enters a meadow pretty quickly, and it starts heading north. And these are some of the big 11,000-foot peaks unnamed in the boulders. At about a mile, you'll go across this meadow. Again, you can see the trail here, not very big. And you'll get right here, and there's a great view behind you, and there's a beautiful waterfall. There's about 4 waterfalls in this little canyon, and there's one of them. And there's a great little pool at the bottom. And that's your view looking back to the south. And this is Kent Peak, which is the second highest peak in the boulders. Ryan Peak's right over here, which is the highest. So you came down here, and then you came across this sagebrush meadow. If you went to West Pass, you would go up here. And West Pass is right here near that peak. There's plenty of places to camp up here. If you want to backpack, there's all these little grassy meadows fringed by forest. And you'll see the trail here. This is about 4 miles into it, and it starts dying. I mean, it just boom, and it just ends like right up in here. And you can see all these beautiful peaks right up in here. It's just gorgeous back here. There's where it ends. It kind of officially ends right here. And there's a couple giant boulders. Right over here, the creek is here, and it's shaded. There's a camp spot right off to the right where it kind of dead ends. And there's the creek. It's a beautiful destination to go to and just come back to the trailhead. And that's the North Fork of the Big Wood River. 8.8 miles, 1,800 feet of gain. This next one, most of you have probably hiked to Baker Lake. Has anybody not been to Baker Lake in here? Neva? So when you go to the Baker Lake trailhead, I thought I had a picture of the trailhead. It's usually packed because everybody that comes here and visits wants to go to Baker Lake because it's like 2 miles to get to the lake. There's tons of wildflowers, the easy hike. I don't think people realize how high the trailhead is. It's like 8,800 feet. So if you're not acclimated to the altitude, people get up and like, this is a lot harder than I thought. Well, there's another trail right at that trailhead. And I found this out by Renee. Renee said, you need to go to Castle Saddle. I'm like, I haven't even heard of that. She goes, oh, the wildflowers, incredible. So this trail goes all the way down to Fox Peak. It's mainly used by motorcyclists and bicyclists. But we're going to venture off of it at 1.5 miles. So you can see motorcycles. Some of the trails in this area motorcycles can only go from certain times. Mountain bikers can use it year-round, horses and hikers. So you'll cross Baker Creek at 1/10 of a mile. There's a bridge. This is all fireweed. So it's, because this area got pretty burned by that Castle Rock fire. It got burned really bad, actually. And then the trail will turn once you get off the bridge, and it'll go for about 3/4 of a mile, and it's side hills through this mosaic burn. There's a few wildflowers, but you get good views looking down to the drainage. And then it will turn. And this is all lupin, and it's just the entire hill is just full of lupin. It's absolutely gorgeous. But see this, you can tell who's using the trail. There's not a footprint. It's all bikes. So you'll go, and this is the drainage. So there's great views. This is called Lost Shirt Gulch. And this is the drainage you would have driven up from Highway 75 to get to the trailhead. But again, look at the burn. You can see it's got really burned in that Castle Rock fire. Some penstemon, and then you'll come to this junction. This is at 1.5 miles, and what you'll do is turn right on the Castle Creek Trail. This trail starts heading to the west. The flowers continue. This trail is motorized. I think mainly who's using this is motorcycles, not bicyclists. In fact, the treads are a lot bigger. But I didn't see any motorcycles. I saw a couple bicyclists, but I didn't see anybody on a motorcycle. And then it will just follow this ridge line. This is Baker Peak back here. Again, all this area got burned. You're going to go back to the saddle, which is about 2.5 miles back, and you just pass all this lupin on the saddle. And you got Baker Peak right there in front of you. There's some more lupin. And you will eventually come to the saddle right below Baker Peak. It's about 2.5 miles. And the trail plummets and goes all the way down to Warm Springs Road in 6 miles. And that's the Castle Creek Trail, which is in the book. So I have it described coming from Warm Springs Road. This next one is so we're almost done with the ones on 75. This is if you go up to Prairie Creek Road, you go all the way up 75, and then you'll take Prairie Creek Road, and it dead ends. This trailhead is no longer here. In fact, when I went to go re-hike it, I followed my directions. I'm like, where's the trail? It's gone. They moved it to here. So the trailhead, there's one big trailhead now at the end of the road. There really wasn't adequate parking here. So this is the trail. There's the West Fork of Prairie Creek. If you've never hiked this, this is another one that just goes out about 2.5 miles and peters out. But the wildflowers, and if you like solitude, that's an awesome hike. No motorized. The rest of these trails, this is motorized. It allows two-wheel motorcycles. Motorcycles can go to Mill Lake. They cannot go to Minor Lake, which is right here. And these trails, if you keep following, there's a trail that goes up over Norton and goes down to the Norton Lakes. And that's a super steep hike and no trees. It's super hot if you do that. Anyway, Mill Lake, I love Mill Lake, especially if you do it now. This lake doesn't have an outlet. It's one of the few lakes I've ever been to that doesn't have an outlet. There was a glacier, I guess, that came in and it created this indentation. And so there's a big rock wall and the water seeps out underneath. And there is a creek, but it doesn't flow out. So when you get to the lake, there's no out there. You don't see a creek coming out of it. So there's the trailhead for Prairie Creek. You can go to all these different destinations. It's interesting they didn't put Mill Lake. I've never even heard anybody talk about Mill Creek, but they labeled it Mill Creek. You'll cross the West Fork twice on these logs. Again, that low water year. If you went up there now, I assume you could get back here. This would be much higher. The water would probably be all the way up to here. So you would need those logs. At a 1/4 mile, the main trail up to the Prairie Lakes goes this way, and Mill Creek or Mill Lake, you take a left. That's the new trail that they cut in. It will go through lodgepole forest for about a 1/4 mile. You'll cross Prairie Creek on this log bridge, and then you will get on the old trail. It will merge into the old trail. And if you're hiking it the first time, you would never, this is the trail you would know. But what the trail does is it stays on the right side of Mill Creek for about 1.5 miles. And then you'll cross this log jam, and then it goes up on this side of the creek to the lake. It gets a little lunar looking when you start getting towards the top. It's pretty steep. You gain about 400 feet the last mile. It's kind of steep. And that's a view looking back down the canyon. It'll cross this little saddle at 2 miles. This is Norton Peak right here. And then you'll come to Mill Lake. And it's a beautiful lake, and the trail just ends here. There is a foot trail, and I have this in the book. The foot trail goes along here, and it goes back here, and there's an inlet creek that flows into it. And there's some great camp spots back there. But if you were to come to this lake, let's say September 1st, the water level would probably be here. This thing nearly dries up. And it's pretty barren looking. In fact, I've done it in late summer, and it's very stark. You get up there, and it's like, it's not one of those high alpine beautiful lakes that you would expect. It's fairly shallow. It's very muddy. So all this gets exposed as the summer progresses. So it's a really good time to hike it late June, early July. So there's a campsite on the back side of the lake. So now I've gone around the lake and I'm on the back side of the lake. Canyon goes up about another 1.5 miles till you hit the steep head wall, so you could go off trail and explore the upper canyon. It's heavily forested. There's a trail of the creek, the inlet creek, coming into Mill Lake. This particular trail, I actually ran into somebody on the trail and they said, don't put this in a book. And it is a public trail, so but I couldn't find any information on it. There really is hardly any information on this trail. Has anybody hiked Trail Creek? Know where this is? So now we're going to go up Sun Valley Road, Trail Creek Road. You'll go up over the summit, and you have the Summit Creek Trail on your right when you get to the top of the summit. You'll go back to where the campground is, the Park Creek Campground on the left. There's a road. It's not really signed right before you get there. That goes to the High Ridge Trail, if you've not hiked the High Ridge Trail, which is gorgeous. I almost was going to talk about this, but this one doesn't get any people, so I thought I'm going to talk about this to try and expose it a little bit. You go all the way to the end of the road. It goes about 3 miles and it dead ends, and you can take a regular car back here. And that's the sign at the trailhead, Trail Creek, West Fork. And there's the trailhead, and it will cross Trail Creek right away. Now this again is low snow year, so if it was high, it might be up to your knee. There is a little bridge. If you go to the right and you hike down about, 200 feet, there's this little bridge there. You wouldn't know it if when you get to the thing, there's nothing that says bridge to the right. You wouldn't even know there's a bridge there. I started looking around and then I was like, oh, there's a little bridge up here. So anyway, you cross the bridge, you'll go back down the creek about 200 feet, and then you will come to this junction. And you can see that it's not getting a lot of use, especially the West Fork, which is right here. This is the West Fork, this is the main Trail Creek. This gets more use. This hike, I'm going to take you on this hike. There's a little sign right here, and it says the West Fork Trail Creek Loop. There is no loop. The Forest Service, in fact, if you've got Matt Leidecker's book, he said we need to talk to them about clearing the upper part. It goes over a divide. They haven't maintained that in years, and there's no trail anymore. I tried it from both sides, and it got to the point where it's like, this is so sketchy, there's no way I'm gonna send somebody up here to cross this thing. So we're gonna go to the right and see that says Trail Creek Loop, but there is no loop. There is no trail that does the loop. So there's tons of elk and moose back here. It's beautiful. I took that picture. They were down in near the creek there with the willows. That was in the morning. So this, I want to show you, this is the West Fork. I'm just going to show you where it goes. The difference is this is all about the views. It's much steeper. It goes up about 2 miles before it peters out. I take you to this big granite outcropping, and that's your views. It's all about the views. There are some wildflowers. It's a beautiful hike. The other hike going up the West Fork is way more diverse. There's waterfalls, there's meadows. There's not as good of views though, so it's a little bit of a trade-off, and it's much flatter, much more level. So you'll hit this, go through lodgepole forest for about a half a mile, you'll cross this unnamed creek, and then you'll go through a couple of these little meadows. And at a mile, 0.1, you will come to this junction. It's not signed, you know, and I'm like, well, the trail looks like it goes this way the first time I did it. You actually want to go this way. I didn't know that. And there were some people up here, a big family, and they had stopped, and they didn't, I asked them, they said, we don't know where this goes. We just found this trail and we're hiking it. So they didn't have any information. So I went this way. What happens is it'll peter out on this side. What's nice is you have to cross Trail Creek, because the remainder of the trail's on this side, and it's braided here. And because it's braided, it's a lot easier. You know, you can go 10 feet, get to the little landmass, go 10 feet. If you go up the other way, it starts channeling. And so now you have to cross it. Again, low snow year, it was easy for me. Here's the trail, and the creek's over here. So I saw it over there. I'm like, oh, that must be the trail over there, because there was no trail on this side. So I crossed over and got on the trail, and there's the trail. So I was up in here, and it just peters out on this hill. So that creek ford's back here at about a mile in those trees. It comes out into this little meadow, and you go across this meadow for about a mile. Not much elevation gain at all. At 2 miles, you'll come to an unnamed creek, which is right here, and you'll just cross this little creek. It's beautiful, and there's a beautiful waterfall off to your left with a big pool right on Trail Creek, and that's at 2 miles. From here, it stays in the forest. You can see it here, and it just follows Trail Creek. This is another one of the hikes where I'm like, well, where do I end it? So I hiked up to this creek, and this is one of the major tributaries to Trail Creek. It's a bunch of Engelmann spruce trees. It's really pretty, and this is where I end it. Because right after this, it gets steep, and it starts going to the saddle. And I mean, I'm talking super steep, and I'm looking, and I can see the trail, but then it would disappear, and then I'd see it again, and it would disappear. And eventually, I couldn't find it anywhere. And you're going through these willows, and I'm like, nah, people don't want to come up here. I mean, there are some people that'll do that, but most people are not going to want to do that. So I ended the trail right here. And there's an old couple mining cabins right over here too that are all collapsed. So I think there were mines all over back in here. This is one of my, how many people in the Cane Lake? I should see a few hands. This is probably one of the 5 prettiest hikes I've ever done in Idaho. So if you keep going down the road, you go past the Park Creek Campground. I think you go back about 15 miles. You will come to a little forest road. It's signed, and it says Cane Lake to your right. And you go back 4.7 miles, and it dead ends at the trailhead. And the last mile is pretty rugged. You need a high clearance vehicle. You don't need a four-wheel drive, but I would not take, you know, a smart car back there, because you're not going to make it. There's some great dispersed campsites where you can just pull in. In fact, we were camping right here, and that's looking up the Cane Creek drainage. And it's about a mile from the trailhead. So the trails will start out in lodgepole forest, not that exciting. You'll go about a 1/4 mile back, and you will cross a little bridge over Cane Creek, and it will now parallel Cane Creek on the left side of the creek for about a mile. There's a bunch of little meadows you go through. It's pretty grassy, and it's pretty. You don't see any big peaks yet, though, but you're definitely in this beautiful forest. It's not just lodgepole pine anymore. And then it will kind of make a little climb for a couple hundred feet and go through some forest. And you'll go across this big rocky talus. And this is still part of the maintained trail. What's interesting, when I was writing the book, that first book, this one, I wanted Cane Lake in it. It was the last hike I was doing. It was October the 15th of 2009, and a huge snowstorm came in. And I got to this point, and I was able to discern it enough to get to here, and there was so much snow, I said, there is no way I'm going to make it to Cane Lake without breaking my leg. And this was all black. Another storm was coming in, and I turned around right there. That's not the hike, obviously. This was a hike I did this last summer. At about 2.5 miles, it's still pretty mellow. You'll come to where the Cane Creek is braided, and it's all these Engelmann spruce trees. It's really pretty back here. There's a bunch of little tiered waterfalls. It's really a great destination if you want a shorter hike. And that's about 2 miles back. Nothing technical. I mean, there's no technical on this, but after this point, what it does is it starts coming out of the Cane Creek drainage. And you'll see a couple photos here. And you're going to, most of the trail, the last 1.5 miles up to Cane Lake is on this type of talus. So you got to kind of watch where you're walking. But the views of the Pioneer Mountains here are just gorgeous. So this is the drainage. The trailhead would be down here. This is the trail kind of comes up here and is kind of unmaintained about right in here. And then it starts coming up through all this talus. And you got to follow cairns. In fact, we were hiking it back, and there were some people that were coming down, and they had gotten lost and not really lost, but they had gotten way off trail over in here and spent, some extra time that they didn't need to trying to find the trail. So it's not real obvious once you get out of the trees. Tons of wildflowers here. You will get to this little rock ledge where you just sit here and look at this beautiful view looking into the Cane Creek drainage, and then you'll come to Cane Lake. This is the outlet creek right here, and then here's the lake. There's about 4 or 5, depending when you hit it, waterfalls flowing into it. It's really gorgeous. There's nowhere to camp on this side, but this side has all these little meadows and tons of places to camp. So that's Cane Lake. If you go to the far side of the lake, this is a little wildflower meadow. You can go up here, and there's a couple ponds sitting up here. This is North Fork Lake. How many people have been to North Fork Lake? Nobody? This made the news, I think it was last summer. 2 people were backpacking here, and somebody had a dog that on one side of the lake, and the dog started coming around the lake, and the other people thought it was a wolf, and they shot it. And that was at this lake. I don't know what happened. I don't know if the dog died, but I remember it was kind of, the dog's fine? Oh, that's good. Nice. Yeah, I remember reading about it in Boise. I mean, maybe it made national news. It was kind of a big deal. But anyway, this is North Fork Lake. This lake's kind of a long drive, so you got to go back 22 miles on trail. You're in the boulders. This is in the Boulder Mountains. It's not a long hike to get up here. It's 5.8 miles, 1,400 feet of gain. You'll go back to the Lost River, and then you'll take a left, and you go up, and Toolbox Creek is back there. That's in the book. That's a great hike for views. You're going to go all the way to the end of the road. And it kind of gets confusing because there's all these side roads that peter off the main road. And I have the directions on how to get there all the way to the trailhead. But there's the sign for the trailhead. You'll cross, that's the outlet creek for the North Fork Lake. And that's right away. And then you'll hit this meadow on the other side. And you can see how little use this gets. There's the trail. This used to be a road. You could drive across the outlet creek and drive up a little ways. But Mother Nature's taking it back. There's a lot of deadfall. Sometimes when I hike trails, I think the Forest Service does this to keep it kind of rustic. You can tell some of these trees have been laying here for years, but none of them are really much higher than this. It's when you get deadfall up to here, it's a lot harder to get up and around it. Most of these you can step over. The big thing about this trail is when you go over this deadfall, it's really easy to see a game trail and think you're on the trail and start going on a different direction. So you just want to pay attention it's about the first half mile when you go through this deadfall. And it's a maintained trail. You'll cross a couple of unnamed creeks, and once you hit the forest, the trail's way more apparent. It's when it's open in those meadows is where it tends to disappear if it doesn't get maintenance. So about 1.5 miles back, this is the steepest part of the hike. This was super smoky day. This is a Sagebrush Hillside, and there's a bunch of wildflowers here in July. You'll come up, and it follows this, and then it gains about 300 feet, and the lake sits right back here. So you can see how apparent the trail is there. But again, there's deadfall. And about 2 miles, you'll be high above the drainage. And the lake sits right over this little knoll. There's about you're getting close to the lake. And then it starts leveling, and then there's the lake. It's absolutely gorgeous. It's set, there's places to camp here and here. The outlet creek's here, so you end up here when you come to the lake. And this is the North Fork Lake. It's super transparent. It's very clear. It looks like a glacier-type lake where it's really, if you've seen some of those lakes from Alaska, and there's the other, that's the opposite side where you can camp over in here. And then this is looking further up the drainage past the lake. So this hike, like I said, is not that far. It's 5.8 miles round trip, 1,400 feet of gain. So it's not that long of a hike. You'll spend more time driving the trailhead probably getting to the, well, you'll spend 45 minutes driving the trailhead. And there's a trail. I didn't go but to about right. I did it I've done this a couple times. There's a little foot trail that goes up here, and there's a waterfall, and it keeps going all the way up here. But it gets really rocky, and that's not part of the maintained trail. There's one last picture of it. So that's the North Fork Lake. 2 more hikes. This one is okay, so if you go towards Copper Basin, you'll go up 22.2 miles up Trail Creek Road, and you take a right. How many people have been to Copper Basin? Hopefully. Yeah, we're going to go to Baptiste Lake. Yes, I have a picture of Baptiste Lake. So before you get back to Copper Basin, you'll go back about 2 miles, and there's a side road that kicks off to the right, and it goes back to this trailhead. Look at all these places you can go to. This is the left fork of Fall Creek. This is Surprise Valley, which is the cover of the book, the old book. This is Upper Fall Creek. This hike was not in a previous book. I did not realize there was a maintained trail that goes up, and this is the end of the maintained trail. This is Moose Lake, and there's a little trail right here that's handicapped that goes 0.6 of a mile to a waterfall. It's called the Waterfall Trail. And if you keep going down this road, Boulder Lake is over here, and it dead ends at the Wild Horse Campground down here. And this is a beautiful, beautiful area. Even though it's not wilderness, mountain bikes aren't allowed on any of these trails. So you only see hikers and people on horses. I rarely see, in fact, the most time, this is one of my favorite places to hike. Most of the time that I've seen people back here is in the fall with hunters. There's tons of wildlife back here. In fact, I hired my son to go do a couple of the hikes I'd already been on. I said, just go make sure that Moose Lake is still there for me. And, you know, here's a checklist. Is this sign still on the tree? And so I sent him up to Moose Lake, and I sent him to Surprise Valley. I did this hike again. I did all the hikes except for these little arms. Well, one day he went up to Moose Lake and I came up here, and we met back at the car and we camped overnight to do these other 2 trails. And I ran into a moose and I ran into a black bear. And I told him this, and he was all like, "Oh, that's so cool. I want to see that." I said, "You didn't see any?" He goes, "I didn't see anything." So the next day he goes up to Moose Lake. He runs into a moose and a black bear. I don't know if it was the same one, but because I ran into him up here, he saw him up here at the lake. In fact, there's a picture in the book of the moose in Moose Lake. He took it, and I said, I'm going to put that in the book. Anyway. So this is the Waterfall Trail. It's only 0.6 of a mile. I do have people that know somebody that's handicapped. They're looking. This is a great trail because it's a far drive. It's a pretty drive. It's not paved, though. So if you're pushing somebody, it's a little harder. It is gravel. The first 1/4 miles through Lodgepole Forest, then it goes another 1/4 mile through the sagebrush meadow. There's a couple little benches you can sit at and look at these high peaks surrounding here, and then it ends at this redwood deck. And the waterfall is right here, and it's a beautiful waterfall. It's a 3-tiered waterfall, about 25 feet high, and you can walk right down here and get to the base of the falls. It's really pretty. That's an easy hike. Boulder Lake. How many people have been to Boulder Lake? You've been everywhere. So if you keep going past where I just showed you Wild Horse is, you'll go about 2 miles, and there's a trailhead on your right that goes up to the Boulder Lake. And this is this is if you go all the way to the end of the road another mile, it dead ends at this campground. It's a really pretty campground. The road actually keeps going further up. And I took my Tundra, and I went up about 2 miles, and it got so gnarly. I said, that's it, I'm turning around, because I was afraid I was going to get flat. So if you had an ATV, and I understand if you go way up that canyon, it's absolutely gorgeous, but you could hike it, but you're on an old, rocky road. So you have to cross Wild Horse Creek right at the trailhead. These pictures are in early September, so you can see it's super low. I mean, we just went across some rocks. So the creek's back here, and what you do is you just go up through the sagebrush meadow, you'll enter some lodgepole forest, and then it'll start switchbacking. First mile is not that pretty. I mean, it's just kind of you're walking through forest. At about 1.5 miles, there's a gorge here. And this is Boulder Creek, and it's super pretty. And it's a well-used trail. I was surprised how wide this trail was, actually. And that's about 1.5 miles back. And then you will cross the creek at about 2 miles back, and from here out up to the lake, it is absolutely gorgeous. And to get to the lake is 8.4 miles round trip, 2,300 feet of gain. So it's a harder hike than going to Cane Lake. But once you cross the creek, that's about 2 miles right here. You will come up on this side. Now there is a trail here. I guess somebody didn't want to, the creek's not that big. So there's a trail over here. Do not take the trail when you get to the creek and go on this side. It's way more difficult. It goes up and down, and it's rocky, and it's not very flat. This is the trail you want to be on. And the views back here are just phenomenal. And you go through all these beautiful meadows, and it's super rocky back here. You're on the other side of Devil's Bedstead East, or maybe it's the west, I can't remember. It's one of the two. And there it is. There's a picture of it. And it's super rocky, a lot of talus. There's the trail. This is about right, the lake's sitting right up here. So what the trail does is it goes around this and goes right up here. And when you get to that point, the first time I hiked this trail, I could see cairns over here, and the outlet creek's right here. And so I thought, I'm going to follow the cairns because that's usually the best way to go. So and you get on a rock, and it'd be like all, not very stable. And the lake's sitting here. Actually, what you want to do when you get to this point is you want to go up this. It looks super steep, but that's the way you want to go. It's the best way to get up there. I came down that. There were some people camping up there, and I asked them about that, and they said, yeah, definitely go to the right. Don't cross the creek. And there's Boulder Lake. And you can see why it was called Boulder Lake. I mean, the whole thing's just covered with boulders. The only place to camp, when you come up, this is where the trail ends right here. There's some places to camp right back in here. In fact, when I was here, there was a school here, the private school here. I can't think of the name of it. Community school. So there were a bunch of 11th graders that were camping here at the lake. And it's beautiful. There's the lake right here. And so if you go back, this is the backside of the lake. If you come up here, there's another lake sitting up here called Washington Lake. And then there's 2 other unnamed lakes sitting over here. So if you like to go off trail. So the last hike I want to talk about, and this was not in the book, is Copper Basin. So if you go 22 miles up Trail Creek Road, take a right, you go back about another 20 miles. This is the longest hikes in the book. When you go back into Copper Basin, you're surrounded, there's the White Mountains, there's obviously the Pioneer Mountains, so you're on the very back side of the Pioneer Mountains here. They allow cattle grazing. That's the only thing I like about here. I mean, you can be up at 10,000 feet and there's a freaking cow. It's like, cows are not supposed to be up here. But anyway, do know that you may see cow patties, which kind of turn me off. But anyway, I won't get into my opinion. So there's 3 canyons. Your first one's called Bella's Lakes when you're going south. Bella's Lakes goes up to 4 different lakes. The maintained trail only goes to the first lake. It's an easier hike than going up to Broad Canyon. The second canyon is Broad Canyon. There's a little campground here. It's a little circle campground. It has about 8 spots. So it's a great little, it's in basically lodgepole pine forest. And this is the map from the book. So I want to show you this. So here's the first trail you come to. It's only about 2.5 miles to the first Bella Lake. We went up to the second lake, which is here. There's a third lake and a fourth lake. These are all off trail. So anywhere there's a circle means it's off trail. So that's an easier hike to get up to Bellis Lake. This one, there's 2 trails. I could not find anybody that described these trails in detail. So when you go up the trailhead, here's the campground. There's a trail over here called the Jarvis Trail, and this trail is called Broad Canyon Trail. And they both go up, and you can do this big loop. I was going to describe it as a loop, and I thought, you know what? I'm going to describe this going to Betty Lake, and I'm going to describe this trail going to Babtey Lake. There's another lake right here called Goat Lake, and you can access both of these with this other trail that accesses these 2. So I'm going to take you up this route right here. There's a third trail, or fourth trail. There's a canyon here called Bear Canyon, and it's on a separate map. I could talk about that trail too, but it doesn't go to a lake. But if you're in this area, it goes up to a divide. It's about 2.5 miles back, and it goes up to a saddle at 9,800 feet, and it looks, you can almost see Haley, and you see all these incredible, it's probably the best view, I think, on a maintained trail in the Pioneer Mountains. And it's never been a book. I've never seen it published. I haven't seen it anywhere. And it's called Bear Canyon. It's a trail. There's a campground, actually. When you keep going down this road, there's another campground, a bigger one, right down here. And the trailhead is actually in the campground. But I hiked it 3 times. I didn't see one person anytime I hiked that trail. And there were very few people on these trails. Again, this is the first week of October. So this is the Broad Canyon Trail. There's 2 separate trailheads. There's the Jarvis Trail. The difference is this trail follows the drainage for about 2.5 miles, and it's shaded. And then it climbs up to the Lake Cirque. The Jarvis Trail starts climbing right away. And it's on south-facing slopes. So it's hot, but the views are incredible. So there's a give and a take depending on what trail. If you could do them both, I would do the loop. There's some cows. So here's the Broad Canyon Trail. So it just kind of parallels the creek, goes through some lodgepole pine forest. At about a mile, there's a bridge over the creek, and this is where the scenery starts getting a little bit better. You'll cross a couple of these meadows, and I could tell there's tons of wildflowers in here. There was all these expired wildflowers in here. You'll go through some more lodgepole forest, and you'll come to this junction. This trail goes up. There's a tiny little mountain range there called the White Mountains. It's basically 2 little peaks. This trail, if you were to take it, gains about 1,000 feet right here, and it goes up and goes into that Bear Canyon that I was telling you about. So you can take that trail, and it goes up over a saddle and then drops back down into Bear Canyon. But we're going to go to the right. And there's a sign that says White Mountains. And this is where it gets really scenic. At about 2 miles, you start seeing these huge peaks in the Pioneers. And in fact, those pictures of the cows, there's some cows over here, you see them? Somehow, seeing a cow right here below that just, I don't know, it shouldn't be that way. So you'll cross the creek again. If you were earlier season, I've read, Margaret Fuller had this in a book. She said this ford can be a little dicey, if you were mid-July. Because I'm sure the water level here would be, way up to here, all the way across. But you'll cross the creek. The scenery just now for the next 2 miles up to the 2.5 miles up to the Cirque, it just gets prettier every quarter mile. The peaks are huge. There's a couple old mines up here. You can see the talus coming out of the mines. You'll cross the creek one last time, and this is at about 2.7 miles. And this is where it gets difficult. It starts going straight up to the Cirque. So that drainage is down here where the trees are. You can see the trail on the lower left. You'll pass this gargantuan granite boulder. And then you'll go through a bunch of these dead white bark pines, trees. And you'll cross a couple of meadows. And this is the view looking down into the Broad Canyon drainage. That other trail would be up in here, the Jarvis Trail. And you will come to this junction at about 5 miles back. And because it's 10.8 miles, 2,500 feet again to do this round trip to Babtee Lake. So when you get here, this trail continues to go up to Betty Lake. What you want to do is turn left. And there's a sign. You can actually go to Surprise Valley. You can go all the way over to Wild Horse from here. And there's a view heading up to Babtee Lake. You'll go up about, I think it's 11 switchbacks, and then you come up to Babtee Lake. It's signed, and then there's the lake. It's a gorgeous little lake. It's very blue, and there's tons of places to camp here. I was surprised how many fire rings I saw. I mean, a lot of people use this lake. I didn't see anybody on this hike. If you go back down to this junction, if you were to go right, it gets super steep, and I'll show you where. It gets super steep right in here. It gains about 600 feet. Switchbacks up here. That junction's back here. Babtee Lake's sitting over here. You come up here, go about a mile, and you will come to another sign junction, and you can take a left, and you will come to Betty Lake. There is not a tree around Betty Lake. To me, it's super stark. Interesting, there was these guys, and they had scopes, and I'm like, this is our first week of October. I said, what are you guys doing? They said, we're looking for goats. We have a goat tag. It's very hard to get a goat tag. And they were from Coeur d'Alene. They said, you can't get goat tags up in Coeur d'Alene. So we had to come down here. And he'd been there a couple days, and I said, have you seen a goat? And he said, no, we haven't seen a goat yet. I left the trail, so it was getting dark. It was probably about 8:30, and I start heading down. I get about a mile down the trail, and a goat ran right out in front of me across the trail. So, of course, I went back and told him about it. No, I didn't. But yeah, it was pretty funny because he hadn't seen a goat, and all of a sudden, happenstance, a goat comes down. This is the last picture I want to show you. So if you were to take the Jarvis Trail from that junction that I just showed you a few minutes ago near Betty Lake, what it does is it switchbacks down, goes across this beautiful meadow. I ran into that goat right over here. And then it drops down and goes back to that trailhead. So if you did the loop, you could do the loop. The loop would probably be about 12, 13 miles. So you could do it in a day hike. It'd be 2,500 feet. But you could see all 3 lakes, come down the Jarvis Trail, go up the Broad Canyon Trail. I did it in one day, and I was pretty dead that night. In fact, I was hiking back an hour in the dark. So anyway, that's all of the hikes. I mean, I could talk about all 65 hikes, and but these aren't necessarily the best ones. These are probably some of the better ones that I enjoyed hiking. Any questions about the books or?
You know, this may be a really dumb question. We're from Florida.
Yeah, I grew up in Florida.
You used 2 words and I didn't understand them. One was the trail was braided.
Oh, the creek was braided.
Oh, creek was braided. What is
And a trail can be braided too. So braided would be like, here's the creek, and then all of a sudden part of it goes over here and a part of it goes over here.
Oh, okay.
Then it's braided. It's called braided. I mean, that's the term they use. In fact, I have in the new book, I put, yeah, it divides, but it usually comes back together again. So, yeah, in fact, I have a glossary of hiking terms, and I think I described braided because I thought some people are probably not going to know. Trails can be braided. You can be going up on an unmaintained trail, and all of a sudden you'll see a trail because somebody makes it there and somebody makes it there, and then they come back together, so the trail's braided.
Gotcha, thank you.
And there was another term you said
Well,
there?
the other one is, I could probably look at your glossary, but it's cairn.
Yeah, so a rock cairn is, when you're out in the woods, you'll see rocks stacked on top of rocks. Typically, they're used at an unsigned junction. So you'll come to a sign, so there's no sign, but you'll see a cairn and it's there to identify, hey, there's a junction. The other place you'll see them is on mountaintops.
People just stack rocks on top of each other so they definitely see them like not natural.
Yeah, I've seen, I know.
But you'll see them, and like if you were going to Cane Lake and I was showing you all that talus, if you look up there, people have put cairns on boulders so you can go, okay, there's a cairn. I need to go there. And then you have to look, oh, there's a cairn. So it can navigate you. And you also see them off trails. So if there was a lake that's off trail, somebody's gone up there, they'll put cairns. Now, people that are totally don't want anybody to know about it, I ran into a trail once in Mccall, and I saw this guy at the trailhead, and it's called Crystal Lake. It's probably one of the prettiest lakes near Mccall. And I asked this guy, I said, this is a long time, it was like 10 years ago. I said, I tried to find this lake last year, I couldn't find it. How do you where is it? Are there cairns? He goes, there's cairns, but every time I see those damn things, I knock them over. I don't want anybody to know where that lake is. But anyway, I found it and put it in a book. But anyway, but those are cairns. And they're pretty, once you know about them and start looking for them, you'll see them. There are a lot more out there than you would think, you know. And then you will go to these places on creeks where the guru people will stack them up, and it's supposed to be art and stuff. I mean, those usually are just on creek beds or whatever, you'll see them. But when they're in the high peaks, they're usually used to identify a route. But thank you for coming. I hope you learned a few things and maybe a few trails you want to go hike. So thank you.